I promise to find a better intro.
Well, I like it. I'm like shaking my booty back here. It's great. Well, hello. Welcome to Teamwork Tuesdays. We are the team at Whole Human Coaching. My name is Christal, and
I'm Carol
Collins.
And
I have to figure out who you're pointing to.
Yeah, I know. I just realized that maybe you're not on the same side of the screen as me. Sorry about that. Okay. My name is Christal, and with me today is Carol and Colin, and we're from Whole Human Coaching. And this is our 20-minute coffee break called Getting to Unstuck. And today is Teamwork Tuesday. So if your work involves teams, you're going to want to listen in. There's a big difference between a team and a gang. But the real truth teller is whether your team can actually tell the difference. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be talking about that today. So Carol, would you like to help us start to kind of set the stage for what it really means when we say, are you a team or a gang?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because when we were talking about it and thinking about those qualities of a gang, they're pretty clear when we think about it. We recognize a gang because there's fear. There's an element of coercion. There's being leaned on. There is a hierarchy. There's often a really scary initiation. Yeah. And there's a sense of going along with that no matter what is going on, you're part of the gang, so you're going to go along with it.
Right.
But when we put that into the context of a workplace, there's actually some very similar qualities in many workplaces.
Yeah.
And so as we were thinking about it, would you ever describe that you're going to work and instead of building teamwork, we're going to build a gang? You wouldn't ever say that out loud.
But your intention may be that. Like you might not say it out loud, but
yeah. I also think that one of the aspects of a gang is so we talk about coercion and even almost more so like the request for silence of anything that isn't like the unspoken social contracts that happens inside gangs. And so sometimes the rules are just inferred or otherwise. That often I think happens on teams. You know, when I was a kid, I remember my mom saying to me, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. And she was using that into relation when I would be angry with my father. But really, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your team at work necessarily either, which is kind of the same thing, right? In fact, you often spend so much time either with them in the same place or being connected to them and tethered to them for a lot of hours of your week.
Yes. And I think that's where, as you said, the difference is going to be in the people who are actually experiencing it. Because there may be people who genuinely feel, yes, we're a team. And then there's others who are on the sidelines who are thinking, no, you're a gang and I'm just at the victim of it. So there is this interesting dynamic that happens when humans get together that has us not always being elevated to our highest way of being.
Yeah.
It is an important aspect because as a leader of an organization or as a leader of a team, it's really important that you know what your team's experience is.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about that for a minute here. So what are, if someone's listening and they're like, ooh, I wonder if I have a team or a gang. First of all, it's okay. You're in a safe place. We're not pointing a finger. We're offering some forward movement towards the good. But can we talk about what are some of the signs on a team that there is some gang mentality, if we want to use that phrase, that it's not at its healthiest for sure, to say the least.
Well, I would say, and Colin, chime in for sure, that some of it is kind of obvious when you are together. That if as a leader you look around and there are groups of people who stay exclusively together, or there's somebody who literally is standing outside of the conversation, or maybe you're sitting around a boardroom, or maybe you're even in a Zoom room and there's people who are silent. and they never get an opportunity to be heard or have their perspective shared.
Yeah, and on the other end too, there's the ones that might be sort of provoking um, yeah, kind of provoking that toxicity, right?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
bringing there's certainly one team I can think of right now that is got old members on it, not old as in age, but they've been there for a while, and
Right.
then it's new members who have arrived, and the old members are kind of ganging up on the new arrivals, and so you have this us versus them. So I think
Mhm.
you've got to be attentive to both sides of the teeter-totter if you want the silent ones, and then maybe the overly vocal ones
Right.
that come into the equation.
Yeah.
Observing them both.
Yeah. I also think
Yeah.
that one of the signs of a team that is not operating fully as a team is when there are certain people that have clear access to be able to bypass things like, we set up structures, in healthy workplaces, we set up
Mhm.
structures to protect and to hold people and to allow people to feel safe in what their role is and to feel safe at work. But
Mhm.
if it's tolerated that people can just bypass the structure, for example, maybe you're friends with the boss or the head of the team, and you can just bypass that structure, and that continues to reinforce the idea of being a gang, because now everybody's like, it's like almost like a crabs in the bucket thing where everybody's trying to clamor to get their way and
Oh,
get what they want. Um,
yes.
and that plays into everything else, whether it's like an issue of equity to begin with, for
Mhm.
diversity in whatever form, whether it's accessibility, whether it's racial diversity or anything
Mhm.
like that. But it's also just in terms of, I think, if people feel that they actually have a seat at the table when the team comes together, do they feel like they are not only acknowledged, but that's a space where other people are going to be held accountable to how they treat them as well at that
Oh,
table.
yes. Yeah. I recall an experience I had a number of years ago now where I was invited to go and build a team in an organization in a city in the US. I'm a Canadian. I bring a certain way of being, I guess, to all of what I do. And what I observed when I got there is that there were distinct rules about who could be hired and why. And at one point, I was the disruptor in the room when I went to the boss, the leader of that particular office, and said, I really see that what you're asking me to do is hire only beautiful women. Is that true?" And that wasn't received very well, I can let you know.
Yeah.
And I was certainly outed from the organization fairly quickly after that.
Hmm.
They couldn't quite directly fire me because I was being provocative, but there was an indication that I was no longer in.
Mhm.
And because of that, it made it uncomfortable enough that, eventually I left the organization. However,
Mm.
there were rules. There were rules that were not written down. There was a way of being in that office that was expected, and I
Hmm.
didn't agree.
Yeah.
And so I was not part of the gang, and yet there really, really was a gang there.
I think we could have a whole session or maybe a whole series on gender as well, right?
Oh,
Because
yes.
I think even if you look at men and women in teams, right? And if it's predominantly male, how we as a species or a gender can be awful and take over that
Mhm.
space
Yeah.
and make you as a woman feel totally uncomfortable. Um,
Mhm.
I heard a couple of stories yesterday from a friend here, who
Mm.
has she's actually the largest employer in the town now, but told me of some stories again of being absolutely pushed out of a team in the most
Mhm.
abrupt fashion.
Mm.
Um,
Mhm. Yeah.
and
So what do people do? I mean, I think my experience was, bouncing, and we talked about it, about
Yeah.
being resilient.
About, yeah.
But what about getting to that before those kind of
Mhm.
extremes happen?
Yeah.
What can leaders do?
Well, I mean, I'm a big proponent of mindfulness, right? And
Mm,
of awareness. And so often all of this is driven by an ego or a series of egos gone wild,
mm,
right? Gone
Mhm.
yes.
rogue. And you spoke earlier of, you know, getting the gang and the going along with the gang and things like that. But there's also this sense of belonging, right? Even if
Yes.
it is toxic, even if you
Mhm.
do know what you're doing to other people is wrong, this idea of belonging. So I think it's and so what is belonging? Belonging is means there's something missing in you about your connection to you and humanity and who you really are,
Yeah.
right? I think
Yeah. Mhm.
so I think a lot of work could be done around mindfulness and awareness
Mhm.
and self sort of self-understanding of what belonging to a team means to you and what
Yeah.
belonging in general
Mhm.
means, right?
Yeah.
Because you
Yes.
join a gang when you don't feel like you belong, right?
Right.
I
When you're
think.
Yeah, I think so. You also can join a gang out of sheer necessity, which is what the workplace can
Mhm.
also be, right? Um,
Mhm.
Yep,
I
sure.
think it's also recognizing that we fear what we don't understand, so we can lead from wherever we are. So we can be, if the leader is too scared to ask those critical questions,
Mhm.
um, it doesn't, just because they're the designated leader doesn't mean those questions should not be asked, and that lens should not be looked at. And when we say, when we use the word critical lens, we're not thinking like harsh, we're just looking at like, let's just be honest, like the truth
Right.
will set you free. It may hurt like hell, but the truth will set you free. And
Mhm.
so when I think about um, times when I have been in that, because that did happen to me as well, that very toxic team environment. When I think about what would have changed it for me was me starting to ask different questions, because for me it was, maybe I just didn't have the maturity or whatever it was at that
Right.
point in time. The questions turned inward for me. So it was like, why is this happening to me? Why, like, so essentially that was a victim mentality that I was perpetuating, because I just was, because I just wasn't, I just didn't understand the power of a better question.
Ooh.
Now, me in that situation would not be the same, obviously, but
Mhm.
when we see things, everybody's a leader, and that's something we learned like right from kindergarten, right, where we tell kids like, you're a leader, you can be a leader, but we soon forget that, and
Mhm.
we stop nurturing leadership qualities in ourselves if we don't have it in our title. Like, it's just
Yeah.
easy to do that. And so when you think like a leader, you're thinking about what is what is happening, or what am I not seeing, or is there something
Mhm.
here that we have not been able to recognize yet, and not
Right.
be scared to ask not be scared to ask open-ended questions, I think, are a really big one. I know I'm like always banging on about open-ended questions, but they're so important because they're so generative, and
Mhm.
they're not putting expectations on what the answer will be.
Right. So what I'm hearing is the importance of a leader being willing to ask those open-ended questions, but of people
Mhm.
being also willing to stand up and say, "This doesn't feel right," or
Right.
"How else might this look?" And a willingness to look at who we are being in the matter. Because
Mhm.
really, a gang doesn't exist with only one leader. It
Right.
only exists if people go along with it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And having agency in your thinking and um, opens up the space. Sometimes it's like finding the light switch in the dark, right? To have agency
Mhm.
for our thinking. And it's not to say that if you've been victimized, it's on you to figure it out. That's not what this is, but it is our opportunity to not be scared, to have put a different lens on the situation, and ask if there's perhaps some things that I am not seeing right now that are possible here.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Okay. So I'm just imagining somebody listening to this and thinking,
Mhm.
huh, I think I'm in a gang at work.
Yeah.
How am I going to interrupt that? And having the courage to be able to ask a question.
Yeah.
So, what what might that initial question be? Because there's a lot of teams at work where there's a pretty good protocol, right? What would an interesting question be? Because I disrupted at a very high level and wasn't particularly successful in my
Yeah.
my exercise. In thinking about it, it might have been working with somebody beside me rather than trying to disrupt upwards.
Yeah.
Well, you know how we're doing that exercise with a team that we're working with, where we're actually creating a manifesto for that little team, right?
Yes.
It sometimes I think often teams are put together, it's a bunch of people in a room and they call it a team, right? And that's not necessarily a team. It could be on a rare occasion, when you get the chemistry right. But
Mhm.
but if the chemistry isn't quite working, some kind of mission or manifesto or declaration or commitment of that team, that could be three people, right? Where you
Mhm.
collectively decide what you're all here for. And
Yeah.
it might be
Mm.
totally aligned to the company's mission, vision, and values and things, but it also might be really specific to your team and their needs, and
Yeah.
how at least this one instance that I'm thinking about, they have a very, very challenging job within the organization,
Mhm.
and so they need to have even a more reinforced team
Sure.
declaration, constitution, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Mhm.
I
know
also think another great tool and resource is the workplace inclusion charter.
Oh.
So that is a charter that the teams and businesses can sign on to, and it basically gives you the charter to be able to say, this is what it means, for this is how this looks in business. And the reason I
Mm.
like that is because the charter does the heavy lifting for you, because people often, we don't start something or do something because it's intimidating, right?
Right.
Our
Mhm.
fear of getting it, of it not being done perfect, holds us back from things. We're scared we're not going to get it right. So
Mhm.
when there's tools that people can actually use that are objective, and that they can then apply that to for themselves, for their teams, and for their
Right.
in their businesses, yeah, it does the heavy lifting. It helps you say, okay, here's this, so everybody knows, and it's very clear, because
Mhm.
we know that even from, as like, that's what makes children feel safe. Children feel safe
Mhm.
with boundaries. That's what, so we, from the time that we are born, boundaries make us feel safe. They don't need to be heavy-handed. They just help us know that this, within this place,
Navigate.
I how to navigate the space, and within this space I can feel
Yeah.
safer, and I can feel, and if I don't feel safe, I know how to get there, and I know who's going to go with
Right.
me there.
Yes. And so I hear bringing this at the terminology grassroots level. So it is actually initiated at a level where people are having a dialogue, they're having a conversation about it with a structure that may help new team members or existing team
Mhm.
members realize their place in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So there is an interest, obviously, in a workplace that works.
Yeah,
And
for
we know
sure.
that when it works, all those cogs all fit together neatly, and we come to work and we're appreciated and acknowledged, and we end work with feeling like we're not exhausted and wrung out. And in the
Yeah.
meantime, there's a way of speaking to each other, a way of being with each other
Mhm.
that perpetuates that instead of fear.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I like that idea.
Yeah. And reaching out and asking people, their opinions. What about their stories? Like, we are
Mhm.
more than just, what you see on the outside. No culture, no nothing. No one is a monolith, right? Of, like, we are all individuals, and so who we are matters. And by learning who each other is, that's what changes how we connect, and
Mm.
it's what makes our work world better, let alone our world.
Mm.
Mhm.
Ooh, that would be I love that as a possibility to
Mhm.
leave this conversation with, is
Yeah.
inviting leaders to take a look at their team and ask for a storytelling session.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mhm.
Just not like the typical icebreaker, but
Yeah,
really genuinely inviting, learning something new about the person that you work beside.
yeah, yeah.
and make it a safe circle, like a safe storytelling circle.
Yeah. Your story matters. Well, friends, thank you for such another great conversation. If you have not seen at the bottom of this, or you're listening to the audio version of this, you can find us at wholehumancoaching.com. And if you anywhere, you can find us at wholehumancoaching.com online, or Whole Human Coaching on LinkedIn and Instagram and all the good places. If you have a topic that you have questions about and you would like us to talk about here, we would love to hear from you. You can reach out to us through any of those avenues, and we would love to feature your questions. And until the next time, take care.
Yes. Have a good rest of your week.
Exactly.